Hi,
Hey, hey.
Hello.
how are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, Pierre. This is fun. People kind of join all at, one at a time, and I get to welcome everybody in.
Hey,
You're the gatekeeper now.
I am. There's actually a big queue, but I'm still doing it one at a time. Welcome, Tamor. It takes a second. We're just gonna let Michael in too. I think there's a couple more people that are gonna join, so we'll just be a little patient here.
do this.
Yeah, there's at least one more that is gonna join for sure. Hey, Tay. Michael and Daniel, welcome to the show. This is the Devium show.
So that's right now. This is
Hello.
Starring Keith.
I consider myself a devium.
You're a deviant. We've been over this so many times. Those are different. Well, I'm really excited to taste these wines. I have all 6 of them sitting in front of me. And have a dinner party lined up tomorrow to polish these off. Only my bubble, which I'm allowed in London. Since I live alone, I get a bubble. I don't know how they police the bubble, but it's allowed.
I should get the a Riesling.
Well, I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes. How's everyone doing?
It's beautiful here in New York. It's a beautiful day. We had a couple of beautiful days.
I might say just a couple kind of random club things. We, going forward, there will not be 12 of these this year for a couple reasons. Number one, it's pretty tricky to procure a lot of the wines. I have like 12 winemakers in the queue right now, and like every one of them has a wine that just doesn't land until fall. So, and the last thing I want to do is tell people to pick wines that are convenient, because that just defeats the whole purpose. Number two, as I'm researching it, and Luke, you might know a thing or two about this, but sending wines, at least the way I'm doing it in the summer, is apparently pretty tricky and dangerous. It can just get really hot.
Yeah.
So especially like sending to you in New York and to Cleveland, Hank, I think July and August are just off limits at this point, given my current resources. So I think it's going to be, we're locked in through April, and then we're going to do another one, which is probably going to be June, unless I can line it up in time. And then we're going to take a break and do September, October, November, and then take December and January off. So it's going to be 8 months this year, and it's going to be 6 to 8 next year, I think, just because we're also getting busier as like things pick back up at like the actual restaurant. Well, let's just get started and I'll let people in. Hopefully I'll notice them. So first of all, I want to introduce Luke. So Walden Selections actually sources 3 of these wines into Seattle, the Hervé So, the Keller, and they also sell Keith's wine. So there are our guest wine professional this month. And I'm not sure if Ryan is going to be able to join or not. He is a vine grower at Weathereye, and Weathereye came up last month as well. It's apparently this real hotshot vineyard out there in Washington, because all the winemakers are choosing it, whether they're in Washington or in France. So if he comes on, we'll chat to him about Weathereye. I have a lot of questions about that project. I've never been there, but I'm learning more and more about it. And of course, Keith's wine today is from Weathereye. So why is Devium hosting this club. I heard about Devium. The first wine I heard about theirs was their Sans Soup. Keith, his Sans Soup, I guess. And I know you have some thoughts on what that means to you, Keith, but basically, if you making a wine without sulfur creates a slightly different wine, but it's also harder. Now, you haven't really mentioned that, Keith, but it is like you have to be a lot more careful. Shit has to be perfectly clean and sanitized. And when I tasted his version of this, first of all, it's just a cool project. It's like, all right, I wonder how this one came out. I was pretty blown away by it, and it was one of 2 or 3 wines where someone has tasted in a restaurant and left with all of it. They just wanted to buy a case after tasting it. So it has this effect on people. And we've since moved to this Weather Eye. We've got, you had a white Pinot Noir that we got last year, which is awesome. And your Pet Nat is filthy. So he's got a lot of crazy wines, crazy projects, and they're all done extremely well. I also just get the feeling, I don't know how you feel about this, Keith, but like there's something about your aesthetic, and I don't just mean the visuals, I mean like the feel of what you're up to that I think people want to consume, if that makes sense. I kind of think that in a couple of years, it's going to be annoyingly impossible for me to get your wine, and I'm not looking forward to that, and I would rather keep you a secret. But I think that it's just not going to happen. And you asked Keith about a project he's doing. He doesn't know if he's going to even do it yet. So I really wanted to hear Keith's thoughts on his favorite wines or wines he wanted to talk about. And again, I want to talk about all these wines and they're awesome, but I think the most important part is like how it reflects on you, Keith, and how maybe these things show up in your wines. Why did you pick these as a winemaker? You're picking peers here, which is way different from how I pick wines. And yeah, this is what the club is about. I think talking to winemakers about the wines they like is I've gotten the best advice from winemakers themselves. So I don't know, Keith, I can ask you some questions, or do you just want to give us a little background on Devium before we dive into Keller?
Absolutely. So I started Devium, the first vintage was 2015, just kind of as a side project to explore areas of Washington wine that I did not feel were being explored. And also at the time, I viewed it, I wanted to pick early, I wanted to make lower alcohol wines. And so it was kind of this rebellious edge to it early on, kind of like nobody else is doing it, so I'm going to go out there and do it. How that has evolved is I care much less about the rebellion anymore and more about the enjoyment of my wines and bringing joy, and also the intellectual side of it. So basically Devium, I push some boundaries. Sometimes I make wines that I want to drink from sites that I think are fascinating. And this is a way for me to explore outside of kind of the typical Washington State winemaking mold. So my day job, I work full time, and I'm a small partner in Sleight of Hand Cellars. I make the wine with my partners Trey Bush and Jerry Solomon for Sleight of Hand, and then I have Devium on the side. So that's kind of how it started. And as the more I get into it, the more things that I'm interested in are more about respect and treating the land well, and people who treat the wines with respect, and the people they work with respect and kindness. And so I guess that's just, if you're talking the overall Devium philosophy, it all kind of comes back to respect. And I hope that shines through in the wine. I think I mentioned that the more I try to minimize my impact on the wines, the more the wines seem to reflect what I really would like to say. So I guess that's where I'm at.
Cool, and I think some of these picks are definitely reflect that. And because I didn't mention that you're a winemaker at Sleight of Hand, and that the balance there is okay. I mean, that's obviously a big project. For those of you who don't know Sleight of Hand, it's a really awesome. kind of rock star, if you will, winery in Washington State. But that balance has been fine.
Yeah, the balance is good. Sleight of hand actually funded starting Devium. So, and I was pushed this direction. It was part of their way to make sure I could never leave, was to help me start my own project. And so, sometimes things collide, and sometimes I have to, focus more one direction or the other that I, maybe isn't my choice, but it's what it is. But for the most part, the balance is really good. I make the wines. I just have a little corner in the cellar where I make the Devium wines, and then I make the sleight of hand wines. And I actually just leased my own Devium space, so I'll be moving into that, not production, but storage and place to host some tastings, and just kind of a place to establish the Devium identity, separate from sleight of hand. And you talk about the aesthetic of the brand, and it's been tough because sleight of hand's a rock and roll kind of, and magic posters and garish and loud, and that's very much not my personal aesthetic, and definitely doesn't suit Devium very well. And so having a place that will reflect the quietness and the quietness of the wines, and the thoughtfulness, I think will be really, really nice. But no conflict. I mean, it's family.
How do you split your time? Sorry, I'm a couple people say the link isn't working, unfortunately. Not sure why, but
honestly, I'm probably 85% of my time is spent working on sleight of hand. Devium fills in the other 15%, and then my weekends and my evenings, and all of that kind of thing. So, but as far as like a classic work, which I don't even know what that means anymore, traditional working environment, sleight of hand definitely takes up the majority of my time. But I think more and more what I'm finding is Devium takes up a lot more of my mental energy now. And it's the nice thing about the way I make wine is that I'm not fussing with anything. I'm not messing with it. I'm not moving it around. I'm not, transferring it from, racking it and filtering it and all that kind of thing. And so honestly, a lot of the best work done on Devium is while I'm not even at the winery. It's pondering what's going on. I don't taste my wines very often in barrel. So, I just don't get into stuff. And so I think about it a lot, and that probably is the best way to treat these wines, is to think about it more and fuss with it less.
And how do you choose your sites? Because you've got some really awesome vineyards. I think Lewis Peak is the highest vineyard in the state of Washington, and the club already knows about this Weather Eye, sagebrush, badass vineyard. Mm-hmm. How do you, what's your process? Do you visit? I mean, you obviously know most of the vineyards, but there are a lot of vineyards. How do you go about picking them? So
I don't want to work with any vineyard that doesn't speak to me on some level. And so if you come to me and you have 400 acres of relatively flat, VSP trained, silt loam, in the valley floor of the Walla Walla Valley, I'm not interested. I'm flat out, nothing about that interests me. So all of my sites have something, at least one thing, and usually multiple things very unique about them. So whether that be they're very steep, or high elevation, or north aspect, like Weather Eye is, or interesting soil profile. I think that for me, I don't actually, this is another thing that I'm finding more and more. I don't actually care that much about the varieties. I care about the vineyard much more than that. And so if I feel like a vineyard has something to say, I don't really care what's planted there. I'm interested in working with it. So, I never set out to make a Riesling Malbec co-ferment pet nat. That just kind of happens, right? And the Weather Eye, I never in my wildest imagination thought I'd be making a Graziano-based field blend from Eastern Washington, right? So the varieties don't matter nearly as much to me as the vineyards and the vineyard blocks.
Fascinating. Yeah, that Malbec pet nat Malbec Riesling pet nap. Yeah, the
Yeah, the
2019
19
was just
The 19 was
Malbec.
100% Malbec. The 19 was 100% Malbec, but in 2020, just in the middle of flowering and fruit set in the vineyard. So Lewis Peak is 3,000 feet elevation up in the Blue Mountains, highest elevation vineyard in Washington State. The wind never stops blowing. When a big storm comes through, it is a big storm. I get where I'm sitting right now we live kind of downtown Walla Walla. I get about 12 inches of rain a year. This is maybe 20 miles east of us, and we get about 36 inches of rain up on Lewis Peak. So it's dry farmed. But anyway, going back, so in 2020, Riesling, the fruit was already set, so it survived this. But as the Malbec was flowering, a huge storm came through, and essentially it just blew all of the flowers off of the vine.
Oh no.
And so, the fruit is pollinated flowers, of course. And so, so what ends up happening is that I went up there after fruit set, and you look at a cluster, and it was a standard size cluster, it was probably this long, and it had 4 berries on it. And then I went to the next vine, and there's, already not very many clusters. So we ended up harvesting it mostly just because in 2020, but I got 0.2 tons off of an acre and a half. And the harvest crew, when they were up there after they finished the Riesling, looked at me like I was crazy when I said I wanted whatever we could get out of the Malbec. And but that's why in 2020 it's a co-ferment. So then I took the Malbec and some of the Riesling, and I just crushed it all together and macerated it, and then put it in old barrels and put it in bottles.
I haven't tried it yet. Is it awesome? Be honest.
I think it's pretty awesome. I don't know. It's pure. It's kind of. I don't know that I've ever made a more joyful wine, and so for me, that's a big win.
That's exactly what I want right now. Joyful wine. While we're talking about Riesling, should we talk about this Keller?
Absolutely.
I wish I had some in my glass. It's sold out.
Yeah,
Burning into coffee.
I bought it all, Luke. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Someone's enjoying it. Well, big shoes to fill because I'm not the winemaker. I mean, I'd love to be the winemaker of this wine, but we're the distributor. We work with Von Boden out of Brooklyn, New York, who imports this wine. Has had a long relationship with Klaus Peter Keller, the winemaker, and his wife Julia, who runs more of the business side of the winery. So big shoes to fill in talking about the wines. Is that what's in everyone's glass right now? Is the Fonder Fells?
Probably not every. I think that most people aren't going to taste all 6. We've got some. Yeah, but yeah, you're in charge of selling this wine. This must be one of the easiest wines for you to sell. You just tell people it's back and then they buy it, right?
Now it is. I think Klaus Peter Keller is KP Keller. It's a name that in the last few years has really caught on in terms of the quality of the wines. For 25 years, he's been at the helm of his family estate in the Rheinhessen, in a town just outside of a town. Well, on the outskirts of a town called Florsheim-Dalsheim in the Rheinhessen. This is just a short drive southwest of Frankfurt. At this domain, over the last 25 years, he's revolutionized really what people come to think of as Riesling, both in its dry and also sweet incarnations. He makes a full range of dry to sweet wines. Some of them are essentially just basic table wines, and others are such as the Grosses Gewächs, the GG wines labeled from the vineyards that they come from, such as Moorstein and Abserde, Kirchspiel and Hubacher. Those are the single vineyard sites, single vineyard parcels that he sources those GG wines from, and also makes a wine called G Max. G Max is a wine that if you were to go on Wine Searcher or just a simple Google search would maybe be able to pry a bottle away for $1,500, $2,000, $2,500. His wines sell at auction for thousands. The case, the wooden box case called the Keller Kiste that includes 2 bottles of the G Max, Typically that sells for upwards of 10,000 or 15,000 a case of 12 bottles. So, I mean, he's really, he and his wife have really come into the top echelon of producers in the world. People talk about him now as on the same kind of breath as Domaine de la Romanie Conti, or really any of the top estates of the world. And he's really, through the way that he treats the vineyards, as well as the winemaking, the whole project is really just about quality and intensity. And I think the thread that is running through the wines that Keith selected from us, including his own wines, really is whole bunches, whole cluster. Right. And Keller, is one of these producers that's not destemming individual berries from that the rachis from the stems of the grapes. He's actually taking the whole bunches and putting that into a barrel and pressing that directly. The wines also see extended, several days of skin maceration. So the skins and the juices are all kind of macerating in the same way as like a tea. So there's an intensity and a depth and flavor that's coming from those skins that is being absorbed from the must, from the juice. And that process itself is what gives these wines such intensity and such intensity of flavor. The Thonderfels, which means from the rock, from the fells, from the rock, it really is to be thought of as a glimpse at those wines that we were mentioned earlier, the GG wines, the single vineyard parcel wines. So he includes the younger vines that don't quite have enough intensity of flavor to be made into single vineyard parcels. Those vines, the grapes from those vines go into the Thonderfels. So it's really a glimpse at glory. And I think the wine itself is the best value in German wine on the market today. It's an incredible wine, pristine. It has raciness. It has all that acidity and that freshness, but with a depth of flavor, really long finish.
Incredibly long.
It's an incredible wine.
It's so delicious. And I poured this a while ago just to let it open up, and the nose is explosive. You know what I smell and definitely taste right now, and last time I tasted it too, and I didn't want to write this because it sounds dumb. I taste grapes. It's always some different fruit. I can taste a fresh grape in here. It's that fresh. It's rare. I feel like you can actually taste the raw vineyard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a whack of actual grape juice in here, which sounds trivial, but I notice it more than I've ever noticed it, in any other wine. And it's absolutely delicious and chalky, acidic. It's a trip. It's long. But when did you kind of discover this wine, Keith? It's such a great pick. Like you don't need to
sure
explain yourself, but curious about the history.
I think I discovered this wine. It's been a couple of years ago, and obviously the reputation of the producer precedes it. And so what I particularly love about this cuvee is that it's dry, and I like. The other really neat thing about Keller is that, yes, they're selling wine for this crazy amount of money at the top end, but they still make a full range of wines. They haven't just gone, you compare them to DRC, not everything is like for, the 1% with Keller. You can find their wines and you get so close to that pinnacle expression for a reasonable, relatively reasonable price, which is something I respect so much. So yeah, a couple of years I've been drinking these, and then when off and on, and then when I started working with Luke and Trini at Walden, they were in their book, and so I've bought some from them as well, and then my local wine shop, I think I bought everything they had. I actually have the 2016 vintage here, but
probably more ready. This is pretty young.
Yeah, so starting to develop some nice, just some nice aromatics, secondary aromatics in particular. But I think I bought every bottle that they've brought into the shop. I think they got a case or two, and I think I bought it all. But no, just and I think this is something that's going to run through all of the wines in the selection. Is the energy. The thing that I really focus on with this wine is there's just so much energy and precision, but also it has this beautiful weight to it and this beautiful mouthfeel. It's like it's like it has a weight without weight, right? It's mouth filling, but and you feel its impact, but then it just is like gone, like a fresh rain or something. I don't know. I love this wine. It's a go-to Riesling for me. I love dry Riesling in general, and this might be the one that I reach for more often than anything. Although it does seem to be getting harder and harder to locate. So Luke, I'll have to.
Come on, Luke. Yeah.
I'll drop you a note later. Make sure.
You gotta fight for this stuff, man. Fight for us.
The secret's out.
Yeah.
One last question on this one, Keith. Does this? I think the answer is probably no, but does this inspire you at all in terms of style? Like, do you taste this and understand what Keller's doing, and does that influence what you might do, or not? Like, do you not really think like that?
I think about it from a perspective of intention, not necessarily direct techniques. We can get into more of this as we go on, but technique and specific techniques have become less and less of a focus of mine. And more, I think that it's the intention behind the wine that matters the most sometimes at the end of the day. And so I tell this to students and people that work for me or that ask me questions. There's one really great example in the wine world. In Walla Walla, we often talk about punch downs versus pump overs versus piquillage with your feet versus your cap management, submerged cap, and some people use pulse air, and they literally stick a wand down at the bottom of their ferment of red, so it's juice on the bottom and the skin's on the top, and they pulse oxygen into it until that juice is like splattering up out of the cap, and that's how they manage their cap. And so there are all these ways to do it. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't agree with. But what I come back to every time is that if you feel like what you are doing is the correct option, if you truly believe in your technique, your method, and your intention is right, it's probably the right option for you. So I'm not going to go to somebody and say, oh, this tastes like it was pumped over too many times. That's ridiculous. Now, I might find their wine to be over extracted, not to my taste, but I guess so. For me, yes, I take a lot of inspiration from the intention behind wines like this. And I actually, to some degree, I'm pretty sure this is, you can correct me, Luke, I'm pretty sure this is going to be fermented in oak, aged in oak. This is not a stainless steel Riesling, which I find, well, that's a whole different topic for a whole different day that we could probably spend this entire time talking about. But for me, I find old barrels oftentimes can help bring out the soul of a wine. And so I do make a very, very tiny amount of Riesling, still Riesling from Lewis Peak, fermented in old barrels, aged on the lees for a little extra time. And so I do think there is some influence from this style of German Riesling versus the super linear, crisp, fresh. You'll get those stainless steel Rieslings and aromatics just leap out of the glass, and they're just so fresh and so precise. And it's lovely. But I just find there's a maturity to this fermented barrel age. Not maturity like age, maturity like it's found itself. That I respond to.
Awesome. That's fantastic. The people tasting this, what do you guys think? You're all tasting the 2018, so this is like the current release. And I think, like, I emailed Klaus Pater about I invited him to join, and he said he doesn't do Zoom. But he said he was willing to pick wines for us. So we'll follow up on that. But he implied that this was probably too young to be drinking. I think it's fun to drink young wines just because and a lot of people have to drink young wines. I mean, Luke, you're especially in a position where sometimes you just need to taste wine.
Sure.
And you need to understand what it's going to be because you have to, buy it and sell it. But yeah, he definitely implied that this will get better with age. But I'm glad some people are tasting it now. Do you love it? What do you think, Pierre?
I think Danielle knows much more about this kind of wine than I do. So
Yeah. What do you think, Danielle?
I think it's beautiful. It's rich and it's unctuous, and I get some butter, almost barely butterscotchy kind of nuances. Um, the perfume in the nose is exquisite.
Yeah, the nose is great. You got it open, Hank. I know that you're a huge, Keller fan, so this is definitely not your first fight with a glass of Keller. But what are your thoughts on the 2016?
No, it's
2018, sorry.
2018. Yeah, it's delicious. I was just laughing when Klaus Peter Keller would say it's too early to be drinking this, as he probably opens a bottle at 01 G Max or something and says that's too early too. But no, we love the Keller stuff. I mean, we've drank more of the Trocken than I can count. I actually just found some 18 RR, and I've never had the RR, and I'm really excited to try that because I hear good things about it. I can't really get Keller very easily in Ohio though, so I had to try to go around some things to find it. But
we're recording.
I like this a lot, and I'm completely happy to drink it now.
Awesome. And you've got it, Michael and Daniel too. Did you open it or not?
Yeah, we carve in the bottle. So
okay, that's smart.
I don't know how long I should keep bottles around after I carve in them, but we'll keep it around for a little bit. Not forever. Yeah, it's really nice. It's got the weight of a really nice older Riesling, but like Keith was saying, it just kind of dances off your palate. So you kind of know what it was, and then it's gone. I like it. It's very it's very of the moment.
There's I still taste citrus in my mouth now. It's been a while since I had a taste, and it's like I was sucking on a lemon really or something. It has a very, at the same time, persistence about it, and that something is going on for a really long time after you taste this wine.
It kind of reminds me of we used to have a loquat tree in our backyard when I was a kid, and it's just a really weird citrus fruit, but the finish is forever, and it kind of keeps evolving, kind of like this. It doesn't taste like loquat, but.
Awesome. Cool. And no one else, Tay, you're not tasting it, are you?
Sorry, I was muted. Unfortunately, no. I'm probably a few hours away from getting to it, but I look forward to it.
Okay. I'm watching that light on your wall. It's going to be evening sometime.
Very soon.
Okay, I'm going to retire the Keller.
Ian,
can I ask a quick question?
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
You were talking about the whole cluster in the Keller with the whites, and is the tannin, how is the tannin in whole cluster white versus whole cluster red, and how is that different in how it expresses, or is it exactly the same? And then part two question to Keith, did you say that the Riesling you're making is also whole cluster in the same style?
Yes. So I'll kind of answer both questions for you, if that's all right. The difference in tannin between whole cluster red and white, it depends on when you press the white wine. So if you press immediately whole cluster, you're not going to get as much tannin. You'll get a little bit from the stems and a little bit from the skins, maybe a touch more, and it tends to you tend to press out a bit more. So if it doesn't sound it doesn't sound like it should, but when you put a whole cluster bunches into a press immediately, you tend to get a bigger yield and juice than if you destem and put that in. And it's the stems kind of help the press do its job. So what I find is that by the end of your press cycle, when you put whole clusters into the press, you are extracting more tannin, more from the stems. Now, in this case, where they are doing some skin contact for a few days, so you're now adding in the maceration portion. And now this is very similar to red wine as far as how it will extract. So The only thing you're obviously not getting are the color, the anthocyanins, but white grapes have tannin in the skins just like red grapes do. In fact, sometimes with some of my reds that I co-ferment with whites, it sounds crazy, but for instance, my French Creek red wine, the most tannic of the grapes that is in that most of the time is a little bit of Grenache Blanc. It is a more tannic grape from that site than the Syrah or the Mourvèdre. And so when you do that maceration, you are extracting tannins in a similar way. Now, my guess is his maceration, you're talking a matter of 2 or 3 days, maybe a little longer, versus to really extract a lot of tannin, you would need to macerate a red or a white wine for at least a week, and typically a lot longer than that. So my reds, for instance, I'm 3 to 4 weeks of maceration versus some white wines I do with skin contact, it's 1 to 2 weeks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
Keith, can you speak to the challenges of the potassium reaction with skin maceration in white wines? Because I think that's another interesting thread to pull on.
So this is a fascinating one, and can go way down a rabbit hole here as well. So when you macerate with whole clusters, whether it's red or white grapes, you extract. So if you destem and get rid of your stems, there is potassium present still, but with stems, there's more potassium. And so there is the risk of raising your pH, which can lead to less stability in the finished wine, less acid, obviously, less stability, and can oftentimes actually, pH and acidity are one of the most important things for the age worthiness of a wine and maintaining that freshness and maintaining the, an acidic solution is a very, very strong antioxidant compared to most other things. So people want to talk about sulfur being an antioxidant, and they're crazy. Tannins, anthocyanins, and your pH matter so much more as far as antioxidation goes. So yes, there is a very real risk of a whole cluster maceration with white wine of raising your pH too much, especially if you're working with a high potassium site. Now, being from Washington, and all of our basalt-based soils, I tend to have in some of my sites quite a bit of potassium. So for me, with a red wine, I don't worry about it too much. I see a pH swing of just a couple of points. With white wines, I just make sure with how early I pick that I'm still making a stable product, and that's kind of my generalized answer on that. Because yes, it is very real that you can raise that pH and lead to either a wine that won't age very well, or that's not balanced, or that's prone to browning.
Cool. Well, do you guys want to taste a Chablis?
Absolutely.
So this one is not yours, Luke. Do you want to sell this wine?
What is it?
Depends on what it is.
Oh, you don't have it in front of you. Yeah, it's the Pat Lulu Chablis. Yeah.
Love the label.
Yeah. So this is a Thomas Calder selection, and it's a Cavatappi.
Wonderful. Is there a Lou D?
He does some, this is his Chablis. He does some Premier Cru as well, but I've never had them. I've only had his basic Chablis.
And Tamor, the Frenchman, I guess we have two kind of Frenchmen here. I think you're the one that pointed out to me that Vendange was a kind of play on words.
I think so, yeah.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I feel like a D-bag. So Vendange means grape harvest. I think it also might mean vintage, but I'm not 100% sure. Like you can say like, oh, it's this year's Vendange, I think. And then it's a homonym, but differently spelled. For wind of angel is pronounced the exact same way. Vent is wind, of angel, d'ange. So I think it's a pun. Is my understanding.
I'm convinced it's a pun.
based on the label, I would agree with you because it's definitely an angel on the label there. So
Keith, how did you run up against Toma Pico?
So this is the newest discovery of this lineup. So I think I had this wine for the first time maybe 6 months ago. It was a COVID discovery while trying to support our local everything as much as possible. We were making very frequent trips to our local wine shop. It's called The Thief. The owner's a friend, and she does a great job. And sometimes I take her suggestions and sometimes not. And this is one where I'm really glad that I did. This was something she had just gotten in, was really excited about it. And so I grabbed a couple of bottles. And what struck me, so first off, this is 2018 vintage. At least that's what I think that's what everyone has. 2018, for me, can lack a little focus in some of these regions. So this is definitely going to be a riper, richer expression than I think you're going to find in most years. But I loved how well the wine carried it. And the other thing that I really appreciate about this wine, and you actually, Luke, I'd be curious to hear what you think about this. I find that the typical farming in Chablis tends to lean towards pretty industrialized and there's a lot of, for me, there's a lot of very soulless, expressionless, crisp, acidic white wines being produced. And so to find something that is farmed organically to a very high level, made without new oak, of course, which I think sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, minimal sulfur and unfiltered, I just found this Chablis carries so much personality that unless you're playing in the very top echelon of Chablis most of the time, you just don't find that in a village level Chablis that often. And so two things. One, I loved how well he seemed to handle a challenging vintage, and two, I really respected the winemaking and the philosophy behind it.
Yeah, I hadn't tasted this one until you sent it my way, and I love it. And I also have just been researching that operation for a while now, and it seems like he's just so cool. And it feels like you guys are really in tune with how you guys approach things. He says the same thing about people and like respecting place. And yeah, this is a pretty full, beautiful wine. But yeah, it's certainly not, there's just something special about it. There is a little bit on the edges, I would say.
Yeah. It comes across the low sulfur. I think it has it on the label, which I appreciate. I'm not planning on doing that anytime soon, but I do appreciate when other people do. It's bottled with 9 parts free and 36 parts total. I would guess your average large production Chablis you buy off the shelf is probably bottled with 35 to 50 parts free and pushing 75, 80 parts total. So, but even without that on the label, there is a low sulfur character to this wine. And it's sometimes a hard one to define, but that's kind of the point of low sulfur, is that it is hard to define, or no sulfur. But I appreciate it.
Yeah. And when I was tasting these, after the Keller, I was like, I don't know if the Keller can lead this lineup because it's so persistent. I'm like, I'm gonna need to like pound biscuits or something in between and water. But then after tasting the Chablis and think it's fuller, it is heavier. And it is definitely the correct order. It's the order you would suspect, but just because that there was so much energy in that Riesling, I was worried that it would like carry over into this one. But yeah, this is awesome. It was hard to get this originally, and we just got word that there's like a new shipment. So
awesome.
I'm just gonna buy a bunch and keep it on our menu as long as I can. So
Perfect.
This is
well, hopefully one of these days when we come back to Seattle, we'll come in and we'll drink a bottle.
Yeah, when shit normalizes, we're all gonna drink a lot of bottles. So nothing will change, right? But yeah, is anyone tasting this one too? You Corrigan people should be.
We did not Corrigan this one.
I think Henry
Corrigan
is.
the Cusco for next, but I didn't even have this one chilled.
Mine's at like cellar temp right now.
We're excited to taste it. It's just a question of what food. And so since we're tempted to open all the bottles but won't,
Well,
the one we have.
this is a great question because I think this is another lineup. We have some lineups in the future which don't lend well at all to a pairing menu, but this is one that like is a perfect progression, like through weight and flavors. Yeah, what do you eat with the Chablis, Keith? I'm curious.
You know, I probably, you know, we've been doing a lot of poached sablefish recently, and I think that this would be perfect with that richness and that kind of silky texture of the sablefish, just like gently cooked. You know, I think it can hold up to salmon. Obviously, I'm going seafood route here. You know, I would love it with some Dungeness and some melted butter. It's just simple. And then, you know, but I think you can go up to. I don't think this would be out of place with a really clean, classic roast chicken prepared in a lighter way with a lighter sides. You know. So maybe skip the sauce or the reduction and go with you know, just like or maybe like a lemon driven pan sauce. I think could be really a nice match. I think it has enough weight being from this vintage that it can go a lot of directions.
Now you've got another really good roast chicken wine here, and I'll mention that when it comes up.
Actually I'm going to say every wine on this list except that Keller is kind of a roast chicken wine. I just was having a conversation with another restaurant yesterday, and they're pairing one of my wines with roast chicken next week. And I actually said, that's the prerequisite. The one thing that I focus on when making my wine, besides the intention and the thought, is every wine I make has to pair with roast chicken. It's not an option. So.
Devium rotisserie and wine. I like it.
Yeah. No, I think my wife and I roasted chicken almost once a week during the winter. It's a tradition for us.
Well, this is gorgeous. And in my corresponding with Thomas, he claims he doesn't have good enough English, which he wrote in perfect English. But he extended an invitation for us to visit. So I'm certainly going to take him up on that. And when you're in Europe, Keith.
Yes, absolutely.
You've got the invite as well. Cool. Who wants to move to a red? A really interesting red at that. Are there any other questions about this Chablis?
Luke, I'm going to get your Chablis opinions later if you aren't going to share them.
Well, you know, I'm thinking about the Thomas Keller lemon brine chicken recipe.
Oh,
that's what I'm salivating over about.
You know what? That might be the route we have to go tomorrow with the rest of this bottle.
Can you take pictures, please? All right, I'm gonna kick things off to the next wine. This Bad Boy Trousseau. So this is fascinating. So Irie, they were the first people to plant Pinot in the Willamette, in fact. By the way, speaking of history, I'm gonna go back to the Keller for a second, because when I was like posting about it on President's Day, I realized that the first Keller wine was made the same year George Washington was inaugurated. They've been making wine for the length of the United States, which is pretty awesome. I know it's changed radically over the years, especially recently, but you know, his descendants and that estate has been working since 1789. And they were flushed out of Switzerland by the French Revolution is how they landed there. Interesting history there. Anyway, another kind of, obviously the time frame is very different, but the first, David Lett planted the first Pinot grapes in what is now the premier Pinot growing area in the United States, I would say. This is not a Pinot. This is a Trousseau, which is awesome because now I knew this wine was there, but I had, I just hadn't taken the time to taste it yet. I've only ever had Trousseaus from France, the Jura, and I know that there are some from Portugal which I haven't tasted yet. And so this is awesome for a few reasons. It's like a really historic nod to someone that's really important to the region, but it's also like a super playful, experimental. I don't even know, I haven't really Googled it, but is anyone else growing Trousseau in the region?
There are a few people now. From what I know, this was the first planting in the Willamette. But I think, Luke, does the Beckhams have some Trousseau now?
They have the largest Trousseau vineyard plantings in the U.S.
No shit, Beckham?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah,
is it amphora as well? Like,
they are making
amphora.
Okay. We're learning things. Gonna look into that. But yeah, so what do you I mean, this is a really exciting wine, but how did you kind of come across it? You obviously have been familiar with Irie for a while, just given.
Yeah. So, I wanted to have, when doing the selection, I wanted to have at least one Northwest wine besides my own, a little shout out to the home team. And because we're making some great wines here in the Northwest, and I'll be honest, it would have been very easy for me to dive into the Walden book and find, because they work with so many cutting edge, fascinating Willamette producers and Oregon producers. But there was something about this wine and the fact that it's the first producer, the first person who ever planted Pinot Noir in the Willamette, and now here they are making a Sans Souf Trousseau. And being on the leading edge of that as well. And I think sometimes we forget to pay the proper respect to some of these pioneers and some of these, because there are all the cool young producers, some friends of mine, people I know, wines I love. And I just think we overlook sometimes the people who've been around for a while. And so that's why I picked this wine, was just show a little nod of respect to the history, to the fact that they're continuing to be a pioneer all these years later. And it's a really freaking delicious bottle of wine. So I first had this at a restaurant. We were sitting at the bar in Hood River, and I had a glass of this, and it just really caught my attention. I was quite taken with it from the first time I tried it. And so ever since, I've kept a little bit on hand and open up a bottle here and there. What I love about this, and the reason I probably chose this wine instead of a Jura, is that so far, my experience with it, the bottle consistency has been really good. And for me, I find that the great Trousseaus from France, you sometimes have to get that level of consistency bottle to bottle, you have to walk. It's either the wine's really hard to find, or you have to go way up the price scale to find somebody who's putting these out where every bottle is consistently great. And so I didn't want to make a selection of something where it might go out to, however many people, and some people are going to have this amazing experience with it, and some people maybe not. And so that's kind of where I went with this wine. Trousseau is a grape I love. I actually would love to plant some up at Lewis Peak. Hopefully sometime in the near future, we'll get that done. And I love the ethereal quality of Trousseau. This is actually a little more foursquare, a little bit more, even though it doesn't look like it, just a little bit more weight. And I think it's just 11.5% alcohol or whatever it is, than a lot of the French examples. But I thought it was true to the variety, true to the place. And I think it is it's an admirable wine, and something that I really respect. Again, a pioneering winery that continues to, rather than sitting on their laurels, which they very easily could, continues to put out interesting wines and try to continue to push the envelope.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm drinking a different vintage from you guys, but this has also been poured for a while, and now I'm just on the nose. It's like, originally I wrote that it smelled like it was just about to rain. Do you know what that smells like in like the spring? It's like you can tell it's gonna rain. Now it smells like a kind of a cow pasture that's just full of flowers. And I don't mean cow pasture in a bad way. It smells like rich earth, and it is very ethereal, and it's not persistent, and it also is low on structure. Like this is pretty decidedly low on structure. There's not a lot of alcohol, there's not a lot of tannins. It's kind of one dimensional, but that one dimension is like a really beautiful painting. You know, it has all these flavors to it, and it has a beautiful bouquet, but it kind of glides over and is done. And you got to pick out all these little, it activates all these little parts of your mouth, and then just goes away. And it's super fun. I poured a glass of this for dinner, and I had a burger. I think that's an awesome pairing, and I can't fully explain why, but this has kind of a meaty, like funky flavor to it. I think it goes really well with beef, even though it's not a big tannic wine. It's a different way to pair with like I think it would go well with a steak too. It wouldn't hide anything from the meat for sure, but this is such a beautiful wine. There's also something, it's not as like zippy, I would say, Keith, as the French wines. If that makes sense.
I actually, I was just thinking that it's coming across, I think it's following the two pretty bright whites. It is definitely coming across softer than I remember it when I've had it by itself, and definitely softer in almost every way than a lot of it's a lot of the trousseau that you drink from France. But again, I'm quite taken. There's a charm to it that it's like it has all these, the lack of structure, not as much acid as probably you would think it would have, and things like that. And yet it still somehow is just a delight. And so, I appreciate wines that can confound perception.
I couldn't agree more. And this is another one that we're just adding to our menu because Keith forced me to try it for the first time, and we're just gonna sell this wine now. So thank you for that. It's very unique, yeah. Actually, I think we got one single bottle of Trousseau in, and I'm pretty sure Michael and Daniel bought it. We had it for like a day.
Ian, what do you think David will cook to go with this wine?
I'm saying steak, man. It's honestly, it's not intuitive, but it's a very light wine. I just think I can imagine pouring this on meat. I think that's the pair. Something, a good amount of salt, a rare steak. I mean, my burger pairing was perfect. They're kind of similar in like a very satisfying way. And that's not to put down that's not to say this is like a burger wine. This is a beautiful, beautiful wine, but it does a lot in its dimension and doesn't exceed those bounds. And it's a Trousseau. I mean, it's a very light, this is what a Trousseau is, right? It's a very light, fun grape. But I think I feel like this is just Oregon. This is the difference of terroir here. Like it's kind of I want to say there's like a little bit of a deeper flavor. I think there's a little more earth in it than others I've tasted.
I was curious about the bottle consistency comment that you made, Keith, and why there would be so many variations between bottle to bottle. And is that because it doesn't have as much of a structure?
That for sure will have an impact on the variation. There's also just, You know, the way these are typically made is going to be very minimalist, low sulfur or no sulfur. I just find it's a grape that that because it's so light and it's just so yeah, again, to use the same word, ethereal. Any kind of bacterial anything can just take over the whole wine, and so rather than having a nice little hint, subtle hint of Brett, I so often find Trousseau is overwhelmed by it. So that's, you know, examples like that. And so while I buy and drink a lot of other Trousseaus, I do it with my eyes wide open, understanding that sometimes you're gonna dump a bottle out, and that's just the nature of drinking wine. Sometimes wines that are pushing the envelope as far as going into the minimal intervention world, the grape varieties, and so. But I didn't want to force a wine like that on all of you, so that's why I played it safe on this one. But again, it's easy to play it safe when there's such a delightful bottle available that does everything that I was looking for in a Trousseau in a unique way, and that I trust will be sound when it reaches all of your glasses.
And no one opened this on the call. You didn't open it, did you, Henry?
We opened it.
Oh, sweet. What's going on the nose for you? You have a different vintage, but I've had mine open for a while, and it's definitely completely transformed. But what do you smell?
I liked your description of like it just starting to rain. I feel like it's a little bit like almost like just like faintly musty.
Yeah.
And I think like the flavor, I love that it's like a little dance between like fruity and savory. It's like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's really delicious. And Henry said he would be happy just like drinking it by itself too. Like he
totally. It's like
but you did get my mouth watering for
we might eat burgers. we might eat burgers tonight.
Yeah, but do you agree it's kind of one-dimensional in not a bad way, just a fact? Like it doesn't have like a super tannic structure, you know, it doesn't the alcohol is low.
Yeah.
No,
I agree with that. I think when you first said it, I kind of laughed, but then the more I was tasting it, I understood what you were saying.
Yeah. And I remember also asking, I wasn't sure if this or the Gamay should in the order, but Keith and I think both were on the same page that this should be tasted first.
Definitely.
And yeah, the volcano wine we're about to taste is just a little more full. This is awesome. I'm so glad you picked this, Keith, and I'm really excited to drink more of this and actually sell it. I think it'll be an easy sell. This is halftime. Does anyone need, water or anything? How we doing?
Good.
I do.
I have to get work. Sorry, guys, but buzzkill, literally buzzkill.
Shahab. Well, thanks for your angel wind.
That's what I
that
bring.
Was dirty now that I say it.
Yeah, let's take a break for 5 minutes.
Well, I'm gonna go get some water, but I will be right back. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
See you guys. Bye.
One moment.
Yeah.
Hey, Keith, can I ask you a quick question on our break? Just
Of course.
So we're having simple broiled lamb chops for dinner tonight. And I'm looking at the next 3 wines that we're going to be drinking. And I think all 3 could potentially work in that direction, but would one be better than the other? And I'm really eyeing the Gamay to open.
You know, they all will work beautifully with lamb.
The Syrah would be really good.
Yeah, the Syrah would be really good. Also, lamb's one of my favorite pairings with the weather eye. The Gamay is going to be great too. You can't go wrong. That just sounds like a lovely dinner, no matter which direction you go.
All right, well,
she's an amazing chef.
Shush. Thank you. Can you please pick one for us to open?
No.
Ian, how about you? You're
Well, I think this Syrah in particular would go really well with it. The weather eye is an interesting comment. If you open the weather eye, I just want you to pay really close attention and I think you should taste it right away and then let it sit. I think when it is like licking a piece of basalt.
Oh.
So one thing, sometimes I like food wines, ones that I don't have to think about as much, to be honest.
Yeah.
Weather eye, I think, is a fun wine to like sit and contemplate.
Mhm.
I mean, the Gamay would be great too, to be honest, but that Syrah is going to be fantastic. I would open. That would be my preference.
You're a bad man, Ian.
So
It's beautiful and it's fresh. It's an incredible. I don't know how. Like this is a young Syrah and it is just so drinkable right now.
Okay. Okay. The other question I was going to ask is the Devium, is it ready now or should it sit a little bit?
Well, give this to Keith.
Yes, and yes.
Yes and yes is the correct answer.
I like it. I like it with a healthy decant, if I'm being honest, or even the second day. So, or third day. Sometimes the fourth day. This wine is bulletproof. It's going to age as long as but it's delicious now. But I definitely think, I'd give it some air.
Thank you.
Going with it.
Cool. Well, thanks for letting me grab some water. Is Jay coming back, Hank?
She'll be back in a second, but she's right here. You can continue.
So this, I mentioned a couple different other wines when I was giving Keith his Q&A because I've talked to him a little bit about Loire, but really like I think it seems like the Beaujolais is really your wheelhouse in terms of inspiration and I know that, these wines are often very low intervention, but not because they try to be necessarily, that's just the way they've always been done there. And the winemakers are extremely careful, and it's one of my favorite regions as well. And you've chosen the top of the volcano, Montbreuil. So this is Chateau Thivon. It is the oldest estate on the mountain. So this is a volcano. And yes, I don't remember what, this might be from a couple different vineyards though. I don't remember if this might be south-facing vines in this case.
Yeah, I think it's south-facing vines, steep slopes. It's not the very oldest vines. Those go into a couple of their prestige cuvées. But I tend to prefer the honesty of this wine is the route I go. And the reason I chose this, well, there are two reasons. One is that I had to have a Beaujolais. I drink more Beaujolais than anything else. I would say we open Beaujolais 2 to 3 times a week at home. And of those, we drink more of this wine than probably any other wine. And it's not edgy. It's not trying to be anything it's not. It's not, there are so many fascinating Beaujolais being produced by young, innovative producers, and I love them so much. But there's something about this wine that's kind of like just a warm hug. And you can go back to it all the time, and it suits what Côte de Brie is supposed to be for me. And so again, I buy at least a case of this every vintage, probably more, and we drink it all the time. So that's why this wine had to be in the list. Is because of all of the wines on this table, the most likely that you're going to see if you were to walk into my house on a random day is there's a good chance that there's a bottle of this sitting open on the table. So
perfect. Mine has been poured for 2 hours now, and again, the bouquet is just exploding. It's incredible. And this has a really fun dance between like fruit and kind of that volcanic minerality tannic structure. I think this is like 13%. I don't have the bottle in front of me, but
You know, it's funny is that nobody knows right now. And Luke, you probably know about this. Recent vintages coming in from France, I don't think any of them are telling the truth because of the tariffs. So I actually opened a bottle 2 nights ago, a Loire Cabernet Franc, and they'd literally taken white out and covered up the alcohol and then stuck a sticker on the side saying 14.5%. And it obviously was not what the alcohol was. So
that's funny. Well, the UK doesn't have quite the same problem, but yeah, that's pretty hilarious. This is my chicken wine, by the way. If I'm gonna roast a chicken,
this is my chicken wine too. This is our chicken wine probably 10 times a year. So no, this is. I mean, there's other Beaujolais we open with chicken too, but this is honestly, that's probably going to roast. You know, we're going to talk about roast chicken a lot apparently on this call. But it's probably my my last meal is a bottle of Tavan and a classic roast chicken.
Beautiful. And there's really good bright berries in here as well, I'm tasting.
In fact,
yeah,
my wife's in the kitchen just behind my computer, and she just pulled a chicken out of the freezer to continue on with that. So there you go.
Yes. Why? So why do you? What about Côte de Brouilly do you like above the other Beaujolais crus? I mean, you know, I know you like you're must be a Foillard fan, and
Yes.
yeah. What is about the mountain?
I think that for me, it brings a lovely sense of balance. And obviously, I don't. Anytime we say something that's that overreaching with wine, there's always going to be a counterpoint, of course. But to me, Côte de Brie is the sweet spot as far as the weightlessness and the purity and the beauty of Beaujolais with a little bit more structure. So for me, it's the the place that I think just carries my ideal of a great Beaujolais. Not to say I don't like a little bit more muscular, more going sometimes, or like to go kind of the floral route. Obviously, Fleury just makes you think floral, whether it is or not. And I love some of the cooler sites as well, some of the cooler places that can be so intellectual at times. But yeah, that warm hug of Côte de Brie, that's it. That's it for me.
And what's interesting about this, these vines too, I think there's something like a 45% grade, and it's pretty crumbly volcanic rock. So that the battle they've been doing for hundreds of years now is erosion.
Yep, so very steep, farmed to a very high level. Anyone who has to deal with that kind of erosion control, you have to respect the land in order to do it right. This is not terraced or anything where you can kind of get away with shortcuts. So farmed to a high level, made in a respectful way, and brought up in old large oak vessels. It's like what else do you want?
Nothing. A chicken.
A chicken.
And I read that they do a lot of composting as well, just in the rows. Just they try to get all the natural foliage to really take root, just to protect, just to keep the crumbly ground from flowing away.
Yeah, they've got a flock of sheep that grazes in the vineyard, and all sorts of. I mean, so it's this ideal of a historic estate doing things respectfully and correctly. And then turning out delicious wine. And honestly, I don't know that there's a better value in red wine that is delicious young, but also ages beautifully than this bottle right here. There are others that can play in that same field, but I don't know that many are better at combining everything that this does into one bottle at the price point, for sure.
Yeah. I think the Beaujolais has a few of those.
They do. And fortunately, so far, Tavan doesn't seem to have gotten the acclaim, and the price doesn't seem to go up every single year like Foillard and La Pierre and Metros, which went crazy a while ago. Yeah.
I paid a ridiculous amount of money for a bottle recently. But yeah, the price, like compared to this, it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this and a few other Beaujolais are some of my favorite food wines. Part of it is just the accessibility. You can drink them young. You're not buying them and putting them in a cellar. And I eat a lot of chicken, so.
Sounds about like my life too. So
the color is beautiful as well. It's really deep purple. Anyway, that's an awesome pick. We've always sold one of the Cuvée Zachary, which is some of their older vines, right at the top of the mountain.
It's a great bottle as well. I do think that one benefits with a little bit of cellaring, because even though they don't use much, I find young, it carries a distinct new oak imprint, which is something we haven't really talked about. And I'm not anti-new oak, but I find myself, if there's obvious oak on a wine anymore, it's very rare that I reach for it in general. And that goes across all regions, all varieties, except for like a great bottle of white Burgundy. I can deal with a little bit of oak for that experience.
Someone's got to make the oak old, though. Like someone's got to make one for the team, right? Someone needs to make that wine a few times before you can get the goodness. That could just be a business. Just make a bunch of wine, dump it out, and create old oak.
Soak up all that oak. No, because a barrel within, call it 2 years, a new barrel goes from being about a $1,200 proposition to being about a $30, and it only takes 2 to 3 years. You can probably buy 2 to 3 year old barrels for wine production. I would probably pay $65 to $75 each, and they were $1,200 brand new. And with another 2 years of age, they're worth like $20, and nobody would buy them except for planters. So
my business idea is terrible.
Your business idea is terrible. It really is.
Okay. We got a Devium wine next, guys. And again, this has been sitting for a couple hours now. Mine has. I know. So this is a really fun wine. I think this does the best job of tasting like what the earth feels and smells like in Eastern Washington, which is high desert. It's an austere place. And I remember I sent you that quote, Keith, from William O. Douglas about the desert hills of Yakima sharpening perception, and how he doesn't envy people that grew up in lush green areas, that he thinks he's much better for growing up in an austere place. And I think this captures that more than any other wine. We don't have Ryan on, but do you want to just take a second and, before we talk about this wine in particular, just remind us about a Weather Eye in particular?
Yeah, so Weather Eye is planted at the crest of Red Mountain. So Red Mountain is mountain is pretty optimistic. It's a hill outside of the Tri-Cities. It's a kind of a conglomeration of 3 cities that grew together just to the about 60 miles west of Walla Walla. And so Red Mountain kind of rises up out of the desert, and there's a series of hills. There's Red Mountain and Candy Mountain, and the Rattlesnake Hills are just over the ridge. And so Red Mountain has long been seen as one of the premier places to grow grapes in Eastern Washington. And the Red Mountain AVA is the south slope of the hill. And basically the core of that slope has been planted out for a very long time, mostly Bordeaux varieties, Cabernet in particular. But Red Mountain's a really interesting one for a couple of reasons. And what I find most fascinating about Red Mountain is that when the Missoula floods were coming through and carving out the Columbia Valley and the Columbia Basin, so every few thousand years, the ice dam would break in Montana, and a catastrophic flood would come through. And these came over and over and over again. And what would happen is there's just down about 20 miles west of Walla Walla, there is a place called the Wallula Gap, and it's in the Columbia River. And it's this narrow gap in the Columbia River with cliffs on both sides. And what would happen is as these floods were coming through, that would build up and it would build a dam there. And actually Walla Walla was a giant lake when this happened. And then that dam would eventually break. And that's when this water would all go rushing down. And it would go and hit these hills. And particularly Red Mountain kind of just stood on its own right there. And those waters basically hit Red Mountain and twisted the earth all around and deposited all of these different kinds of rocks and all this different soil and all this, but it mixed it all up. And so when you're on Red Mountain, there's something like 25 different soil series present on Red, and this is not a very big area. And they're not like, well, here's, soil series 1, 2, 3. They're like twisted in with each other. And so that's the most interesting thing about Red Mountain to me, is that you'll be there and you'll be walking a vineyard or a block, and you'll go from sand to gravel, and then back to sand, and then there might be some silt loam, and then there's some white chalky Scootney type soils. So there's just this dramatic difference in soil profile in Red Mountain. So Weatheri is planted at the crest of the hill. So about half of the vineyard is on the Red Mountain side, which is all south facing, and about half the vineyard is planted over the north slope. And my fruit comes from the north slope. And so on your average day in the summer on Red Mountain, it is roughly a 10-degree difference in temperature from the north slope to the south slope. It is also a little bit protected from the prevailing wind comes from the south. So the north slope is a little bit more protected as well. And this is where a gentleman named Cameron Miravold bought the land. And then he basically just handed the keys to Ryan Johnson, one of the best viticulturists in the state of Washington, and said, grow me the best grapes in the world. And that was it. And so Ryan, I talked about these soils and all mixed up. Ryan spent almost a year walking every square inch of this land and identifying where soil series begin and end, where there's enough soil for vines to flourish versus, basically just hard scrabble and nothing can grow there. And he took from that, as well as he's actually an artist. I wish he'd been able to jump on here. He's an artist as well. And so he took these ideas and he found these blocks and where he wanted to plant things. And then he thought about how it would look, when you're driving up, and how it would look from above and how it would look. And so this place is like this giant, 200-acre art installation. It's about 50 acres planted. There's a whole bunch of lavender he's planted. And then the other thing he did is he didn't remove any native flora from the land as he planted. And so you'll be walking a row of Migraziano, and you'll come across a patch of rabbit brush. And the rabbit brush is 6 feet tall and 10 by 10. And he just planted one vine on one side, and he's planted another vine on the other side, and just left it. Nobody does that. I mean, I've never seen a vineyard, except for some vineyards in Europe where they've got olive trees and things growing amidst the vines. I don't know of a lot of anyone who's doing this kind of thing. And so what I love about visiting Weatheri is that you spend about a quarter of the time talking about grapes and vines, and you spend about 3/4 of the time talking about soil and talking about the native flora and identifying wildflowers and just enjoying the nature of it. It's like the biggest pest he has is that the coyotes like to chew on his irrigation lines. So This is a real thing, is him trying to figure out, and that's what we'll talk about. Because the vines are farmed to such a high level, you don't need to go in. I'm not going in there and saying, Ryan, you need to change this or change that. I am pushing him more and more and more certain directions, but he's already no-till. He's already doing a lot of things that I really love. And we get all that great with the natural plants. He'll trim them every now and then, so we get some nice green manure in the vineyard, and it's just a special site, and it speaks of the desert, and that is the thing that I love about it the most. So, I talk about all that. The fact it speaks to the desert, and then something I like to always point out to everyone I talk to about whether Ryan Johnson, this is his third prominent vineyard project. He has a crew of 16, and the average duration of employment with his full-time crew is 15 years. And they have gone with him from one vineyard to the next, And Weather Eye is a very hard vineyard to farm. This is backbreaking work, very hard. It's probably the most difficult vineyard to farm in Eastern Washington. And yet his crew would rather work for him than an easy job where they're riding a tractor all day.
That's awesome. By the way, I keep talking about the nose and all these wines, like the just wildflowers are bursting off this right now. And I do, this does just have all these qualities of Eastern Washington. You've got like the sage kind of spice. You've got, basalt minerals. This is a really fun wine, and this is probably my favorite to taste of this whole bunch. A question I have is because Ryan grows so many different grapes. So, and he knows, he maps all the soil series. So where is this Graciano? And this you've got Mourvèdre, you've got Grenache and Syrah in this as well. But Graciano's the biggest component, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So how does he map the grapes onto the soil series, or how does he approach that? Because he's doing a lot of different plots of varieties, and there's all these. It's this Neapolitan like conglomeration of plots.
There are a couple of things. One is that a lot of it's experimental, and so he does kind of he planted some of the stuff how he just felt was the right way to plant it. But I will say he typically planted on the steepest slopes and the most dramatic soils. He typically planted Rhone varieties and head trained. And then in some of the gentler areas, he put in the Bordeaux varieties. The Graziano is actually not intentional. The Graziano was planted, so there was in 2018, actually the spring of 18, so this year that I made this wine, came out that there was a nursery in California had been selling a clone, well, what they thought was a Spanish clone of Mourvèdre. And they've been selling it for almost a decade, all up and down, especially the Central Coast in California. And it wasn't until 2018 that one of the growers took cuttings and got DNA testing and found out that it was actually Graziano. And then all these guys I know in Paso are like, oh, we knew all along it wasn't Mourvèdre and all this. It's pretty funny, actually. What's amazing about this is that Graziano and Mourvèdre, except for the fact the leaves look similar, are not alike at all. Graziano's early ripening, dark, high color, high acid, high tannin. And that's just the very basic description. Mourvèdre is late ripening, moderate acid, moderate tannin, moderate color. And so there was nothing similar about it. And so they're like, well, we love it, but we always knew it wasn't Mourvèdre, but they really didn't. They thought it was just some crazy clone. And so this is actually planted in a Mourvèdre block. And so I've got the idea was he was going to put two clones side by side. And then it turns out that one half of it was Graziano. That's how I ended up with this fruit in the first place, because he was all contracted out, but he knew I was interested. And so when he verified that he had planted Graziano, the winery who was going to work with this block said, well, we're not interested in Graziano. We just want to work with Rhone varieties. And so he called me and he said, I think his exact words were, I've got good news and bad news. And the good news was he had grapes. And the bad news was that it was Graziano. And of course, because it's me, I said, great, let's do it. And then we were able to pull some of the highest elevation Mourvedre, Grenache, and Syrah to co-ferment, which is something that I definitely prefer to do when possible.
Wow, I did not know that story. That's fascinating because one of my next questions was how you chose this blend, because I think Mourvedre is also provides a good spiciness to it. I think in general, it seems to me that this seems very intentionally chosen to like specifically highlight, and it seems like it's just a coincidence. Because I thought it was like, this is masterful. This is how you come up with Eastern Washington. You use this much Graciano, but you're saying that that's just a coincidence. This is the grapes you got, and you just made the wine.
I just picked what was available, and that's what happened. But it suits. So when I was picking, 2018, this is actually these are the first red grapes ever picked at Weather Eye. And, what are we, 12.5, 12.8% alcohol, something like that. The Graziano is the reason for the color and the acid and the alcohol even being 12.8. I think the average potential alcohol on the Mourvedre, Grenache, and Syrah when I picked this was about 11.5%. So what it actually worked out in this serendipitous way is that the Graziano brought all of the intensity, and the other grapes mellowed it out. And so then, of course, how I make red wine, I pick them all together, bring them back to the winery, foot crush all of the grapes, allowed them to ferment with nothing added. And after about a month, pressed it off in old barrels, and then bottled it with a little bit of sulfur for stability and for focus.
Is it your feet?
It is my feet.
Awesome. I think that helps too. And so, like, are you able to, I'm always nervous that like, oh, these grapes just aren't going to be available to you next year. Like, it seems always so precarious. It freaks me out. Like, can you keep making this wine? Because I love this wine. Like, I never want this wine to go away.
This wine's not going anywhere. I made a little change. I actually picked up the entire block of Graziano and Mourvedre. And so it's morphing into more of like a 50-50 Graziano Mourvedre blends, starting with the 19 vintage. But I don't have a contract there. This is all handshake, but everything that I work with is actually, I don't have a contract anywhere. Maybe I should look into that. Everything I work with is pretty safe. The relationships I have, my fruit sources are not going anywhere, as long as I pay my bills.
I think this is delicious, Keith. Like, this is exactly why you're curating this club. I love this wine, truly.
How many cases did you make?
This was just about 100 cases on this first vintage. I'll have a little bit more than 19. I bottled this in February of 2020. I'm actually holding the 19 in barrels just a little bit longer, so I'll be bottling in June or July. I just felt that the 2019 vintage for me is a funny one in general, and some of the wines need a little bit more patience and understanding. So whereas the 18s were a little more ready to go.
Follow-up question: how many days worth of foot stomping did that translate to?
It's, I foot stomp it up front, and then it just depends on the bin and on the ferment. I'll do piguillage, so I foot crush everything up front before it starts fermenting, and then I leave it alone until fermentation begins. Always, I wrap everything up nice and tight, seal them up, put the bin, open top fermentation bin away, and then once I start to get some activity is when I unwrap it and start to just kind of check on things. And so sometimes I'll do at that point, with this 100% whole cluster, you can't use a punch down tool. It's just a mass. So depending on the wine, depending on what it needs, sometimes I'll get back in and do some piguillage with it and tread it with feet. Sometimes if I feel differently or just want to do a gentle, I'll actually just use my hand. So my arms up to about my elbow are bright red the entirety of harvest because I'm up to my elbows in wine and fermenting wine all day, every day. And so it's a range of different things. But yeah, the initial foot crushing, This was 3 bins. It probably took 45 minutes of trotting to get it to the point I wanted it to be. And now when I talk about foot crushing, I'm not trying to just pulverize everything. There's a certain level of crushed versus whole that I'm looking for, and so I like some of that whole berry, whole cluster influence in the wine. It's not something I've ever really studied or done side by side, but it's a feel thing, and I think it's important.
Thank you.
Is it time for my Syrah headband?
Well, can I just say something? It's really beautiful. Thank you so much. It's
Thank you.
really
Right?
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really love it.
This is gonna be impossible to
That's
get
Yeah.
in like 18 months.
I
Gotta
felt
have-
like when I first, I mean, this has a lot of no's. That is for sure. I felt like when I first started with this, I had more vanilla, and then it dissipated pretty quickly, but it's still hanging out in there. Am I crazy? My nose is not amazing.
No, you're not crazy at all. It's something that
Disclosure.
I mean, at least I wouldn't tell you if you were. It's something that I find with whole cluster fermentation. Every now and then, it's pretty easy to confuse whole cluster fermentation with the use of new oak. And I don't use any new oak, but sometimes you get some vanilla, clove, spice, coffee notes from whole cluster fermentations that mirror some of the flavors you get from new oak. And there's a couple different theories on that and reasons. But one of the things you definitely are extracting from whole cluster is some of the woody, the lignin and things like that, which you also get from barrels. So, I've also seen. I don't use a traditional cork, but there are wines where the cork actually has flavored the wine as well. So. It goes the same route of kind of that new oak, but you're getting, so vanilla is a pretty natural. It tends to go in waves as the wine ages for me with the whole cluster influence on something like vanilla. And so sometimes it'll show it and then it'll disappear, and then 6 months later it'll come back out, and then it'll disappear, and then it'll come back out. And so there have been wines that I've had that friends have made that I swore had new oak on them at about 3, 4, 5 years of age that were 100% whole cluster wines and no new oak at all. So
no, it was interesting too, because what Jessica said was, it wasn't like it was vanilla bean. It was what did you say? More like almost like it was more subtle than that. But it was interesting because we don't always smell the same things, so we thought we'd point it out since we lined up.
It would be a funny place if we all smelled the same things all the time, right? Welcome to the life of a winemaker or a wine salesman. When you go in somewhere and you're like, I swear this is what it smells like. It's why I don't do tasting notes anymore. But you're like, I swear this is what it smells like, and somebody's like, that's not at all what it smells like. Anyway,
I'm getting some vanilla on this now too, on the nose. I probably just wasn't noticing it before, but now that you say it,
So pretty.
right at the end. Okay, well, I'm gonna try to push us to our Syrah. We're blowing past the 90-minute mark. I don't know how to keep these things under 2 hours. Syrah headband on. So this yeah, how did you figure out about Hervé Soho? Because I was really excited, when I discovered him, I thought I was super cool. Like, I feel like not enough people know about this guy, and he's super shy apparently. He just wants to keep to himself. Have you ever met him at all, Luke? He's with Jenny and Francois. Have you ever been over there to visit?
I haven't. No, I haven't had a chance to meet him, and he's not in, although he's making wine from Saint Joseph. He's not in Saint Joseph. He's not. he's up in the mountains, up in the hills, in Ardèche, about 30 minutes out, kind of directly west of the Rhone, the northern Rhone Valley. But he's really up in the hills, and that where he is a kind of a really an up and coming wine region. But the wines in Ardèche are just labeled Vin de Pays or Vin de France. There's nothing. There's no real classic appellation in that area. But you know,
It
we're
looks
seeing
beautiful, by the way, the pictures. And he's like an old like Roman fort or something that he's growing the grapes in and making the wine. Something crazy like that.
I think it's a old hunting lodge or something. His wife's family was in his wife's family. But no, you mentioned Jenny and Francois. This is actually one of her first producers that she started importing, 15 or so years ago. And so she's had a long relationship with Hervé Suot, and he, he's been a benchmark for her, and also I think he, starting in the early 90s, he kind of came up along with and was trained by some, really classic, classic producers such as Marcel Lapierre and Philippe Paquelet. He came about the natural wine scene through some great mentors. And I think this is a great confluence because it's almost like where Beaujolais meets, he has this Beaujolais training, but also where Beaujolais meets the Rhone and meets Keith's wines, because he's working, again, with whole cluster fermentation and semi-carbonic fermentation. And you start to see these themes. It'll be interesting to hear from Keith. We haven't talked about this prior, but it'll be interesting to hear from him his take on Suot and the wines and his impressions of the wines, and maybe on how those wines, the style of his wines, might influence his own thoughts on fermentation. He works with the same varieties, Syrah, Marsanne, Roussanne.
Don't forget that Gamay. It's the only Northern Rhone Gamay I've ever had. And it's one of my favorite Gamays. I just don't know why there aren't more of those wines there. But anyway, well, that's a different one.
Well, so he also does a Syrah Merlot blend. He's got some Merlot planted up there. It's some interesting stuff. I think for me, as someone who I don't know, I avoid the terming myself this or doing this, but somebody who kind of is connected to the natural wine world and interested in natural wine and my wines are definitely minimal intervention, but this is a touchstone producer. This is a producer that everyone knows of. Everyone aspires to drink these wines and to be, and that's it's like a pilgrimage if you ever can visit. I have not visited either, but hope to someday. Of every wine in this lineup, the most similar in fermentation and winemaking to my wine is this. So the whole cluster, the Foot Crush, I think most of his stuff's open top fermentation bins, aged in neutral barrels, minimal sulfur. I mean, this really is, winemaking wise, as close as I know of to how I make my wines. What I love about this, and I drink a lot of Northern Rhone, and it's a region that I really love. I love the play of that classic Northern Rhone profile with the kind of the magic of the minimal intervention. Ian, before we started, you and I were talking about this, and it's like the things in the margins and the things just outside of the corner of your eye that you can't quite see. I find that in this wine. And so I could have picked a lot of Northern Rhone producers that I respect and admire, and some of them more classic than this, some of them even wilder. His wines don't present as wild as far as crazy. They present as wild as in like they're part of who he is. But we could have gone off the deep end in Northern Rhone, or could have played it super safe. But I find that there's just such a purity and a beauty to his wines, and it's something I really respect. And again, sometimes I don't define it as well as I would like to, but this is one of my favorite producers, and wines that I try to make sure I always have in my cellar.
There's
Yeah.
also this interesting comparison between Saint Joseph, the appellation of Saint Joseph, the place itself, and other areas, other appellations around the Rhone, like Cornas or Coroti or Hermitage. I feel like the Saint Joseph, the fruit character of Saint Joseph is maybe closer to what your wines approximate than Hermitage or Cornas. I mean, those wines tend to have almost more aggressive earthiness or super high tannin, whereas Saint Joseph has this like purity of fruit, this like intense fruit character. And I think your wines really shine. The fruit really shines.
No, I agree. I actually find, of course, I've got Cornas and Côte. Well, actually, I don't have that much Côte Rôtie anymore. I've got Cornas and some Crozes Hermitage and Hermitage in my cellar. But Saint Joseph is the northern Rhone that I purchase and that I focus on the most these days, because I think there is a purity to the fruit and there is a prettiness to them. And I don't know. I'm into pretty wines. I can go lots of different directions, but if a wine's really pretty and really well balanced, or it's really joyful, I'm on board no matter what. Like that's that's where it ends. But I also think there's some great, I think there's also a little bit in Saint Joseph, there's a little bit more wiggle room, if you will. You can't go buy a hectare of Hermitage. I mean, it's not possible. And you can't go buy 1 ton of fruit from Hermitage and then experiment. Because, I can't even imagine what a ton of fruit from Hermitage would cost. I mean, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars that could potentially make 60 cases. You can't, as a producer without endless means, you can't experiment. Whereas Saint Joseph, you can find these little pockets and you can experiment and you can push boundaries and you can play. And I think playing with our wine is a good thing. I think everyone needs to do a little more of it.
Good point. So
going back to the partial carbonic aspect of the Les Cessieux, which is a single parcel within Saint Joseph, maybe talk about, Keith, how you play around with partial carbonic, or how you think about it in terms of what it adds to the experience of the wine.
Yeah, so this is one of those things that I really and going back to people come in that are interns and we're foot crushing, and I've got very, very specific an end spot. So I don't want somebody to just come in and go crazy. There's a specific way that we foot crush our grapes when they come in, and there's a specific end point. And the goal of that is to maintain somewhere, I don't know, I don't know my percentages. It's somewhere between 30 and 40% whole cluster, whole berries, whole cluster. So everything's whole cluster, but I want the sound whole clusters without the berries all broken, because it gives you some of that carbonic character. If you go completely carbonic, which is a big thing. I mean, how many 100% carbonic wines do you sell in your book? I'm sure there's a ton. The wines tend towards, they can be so much fun and such a blast to drink, but maybe don't have as much structure. And so what I want to do is marry those two things. And so by having partial carbonic, you get some of that purity of fruit. And that's another thing that helps protect the purity of the fruit in this Saint Joseph, which is awfully good, by the way. So you protect that purity of fruit, but you also build structure. So carbonic tends towards, if it's 100%, you're going to end up with less structure, more fruit-driven aromatics, a lot of really, really pretty volatile aromatics that I love. So I guess, yeah, for me, it's a way of like finding the balance between the two. And so partial carbonic produces the result that I guess I'm looking for. But it's also the amount of foot crushing that we do just feels right. And so I guess I don't know if that's really why I do it or not. It just feels right.
You have a recipe for foot crushing? Do you, I mean, is there a placard on the wall that says you have to get in the tank every, certain number of hours or?
Number of minutes? No. Well, the problem is that I can't have a recipe. For one thing, is that all of my interns are different sizes, and so if you try to have a recipe, or friends that occasionally come down and help, or me, the amount of time I spend foot crushing is much different. I have a tendency to hire a lot of female interns for whatever reason, and they tend to be much smaller than me, and so I can't just say 5 minutes. So it's really it really is a feel thing. It's like you observe how the foot crushing is going, and you find where that point is, where it's crushed to where you want it to be, but not overly so. And so I'm observing most of it, and but it's this thing. It's the right point. It's when you can basically reach the bottom of the bin. But but the juice it's not becoming sloppy. So like you need to be able to reach the bottom of the bin. I don't know. It's hard to explain. You'll all have to come out and volunteer for a day of foot crushing, and then you'll understand that there is a point, and it does feel right. And I don't know how else to put it.
I'll come. I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in.
It's like when you're talking about that, I'm like, that would be my favorite part. But like, what is your favorite part of winemaking?
Oh, it's the quiet moments. It's the moments where nobody else is there, and you're either during harvest and you're going through fermentations and just spending time with them, or it's those moments in the barrel room when nobody else is around, and not even tasting wine or drinking wine or doing any of those things. It's those moments you spend with the wine when it's quiet. That's my favorite part. When nobody else is there, I can't make all of the sleight of hand wine and all the Devium wine by myself. And I appreciate my crew, and I love having them around, but it's those times where it's late at night or early in the morning when nobody else is around, and you just take a moment and you just try to be and to appreciate what it is that is in the cellar. So the best moments, of course, are during harvest, when you've got, I'll have 25 or 30 ferments going, Devium and sleight of hand, and just taking my time and going through each one. And probably not even tasting. Typically what I do is whether it's a punch down or a pigillage, or I just put my hands into it, and you reach down and you find the warm spots in the ferment and the cool spots, and you see what's going on with it, and you pick a big handful of the must and smell it. Yeah, that's it. That's my favorite times. And again, best when nobody else is there. It's okay when people are there too, but that, and then of course, being out in the vineyards is also. But for me, there's a magic to those moments when you're with the wine without any distraction.
I love that. Thank you.
Of course.
And with the semi-carbonic, because as I drink this now, I kind of wish it even had a little more time to air. But we're drinking a 2019 Northern Rhone. I mean, this is as young as a Northern Rhone gets. They're usually not released by now, and that carbonic helps make it more drinkable and approachable up front, and keeps it fresh. Right? That's what I understand what he's doing. He does want to make wines that. Sure, you could throw this in the cellar for 10 years and it would be awesome, but he wants to make wines that he wants people to drink his wines, be able to when they buy them.
I drink.
Really cool. Yeah.
I drank a bottle of Klopp. It's actually not Cornos. It's his Vin d'Ami. I think it's a Vin de Pailly Syrah from just outside of Cornos. Just last night, 2017 maybe. And I'll tell you the difference between this and that. While you can see the thread of Syrah, the thread of Northern Rhone Syrah, the difference between those two wines as far as approachability and drinkability is tremendous. Like this is a much more open experience versus the Klopp, which at its age was delicious. I love it. I mean, it's some of my favorite wine, but it definitely could have used much more time than what this needs in general.
Yeah.
And that was his base level. I'm not talking about his Cornas or, this was like his most affordable bottle, and it still needs 5 more years.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. This is awesome about Hervé, that he's making these wines so drinkable. I really want to meet this guy someday. He sounds really interesting.
It's possible.
I think you got to go there. I actually reached out to Jenny. I was like, I want to send this guy an email. And she's like, he won't.
Doesn't do email.
And he has an email address like on his website, and it just bounces back. Like it's just probably for years not been a real email address.
Isn't that like such a goal for life, though? Wouldn't you all appreciate if the email on your website just bounced back and
Yeah.
people still supported you and bought your wine, and you still were, this touchstone? I guess that's my dream.
Yeah.
Someday we're going to be up into the mountains, and my email is going to bounce.
Hanging out in our Ardèche. You don't know why you haven't gotten an email in 15 years? Yeah, I think you just got to go there. And again, it looks gorgeous, that whole region. It's on my to-do list. Well, cool. I'm like cognizant that it's, 2 hours. Like if we, I want to say thank you, Keith. I'm going to hang out for a little while if anyone wants to, because I do have some wines I'm happy to just drink. But like formally, I think is there anything else you want to say, Keith, that we haven't covered? I mean, it's awesome. This selection is so cool. And we're very thankful you did this for us. And again, I think it's a good reflection on what you're up to. Actually, can you take 1 second again to kind of cover a couple of the projects that are on the horizon? Like, you're always doing cool shit.
Yeah, I've got some things.
What's your favorite new project that you're?
Well, some are new, some are old. But I've got I have 3 years, kind of this exploration of traditional method sparkling wine from Cellar Vineyard, 17, 18, and 19. And it's amazing how fast the learning curve happens from the first sparkling wine I made to the 19, and the changes in that time. And so I have those. They're all in tirage still, so I've not disgorged any of it. I was going to disgorge the 17 this winter, but I checked in on a bottle, and I think it needs another year. And so we're like, it's like one of those things where, now all of a sudden I'm looking at winter of 2021, early 2022 disgorging. And so, we're going to be 5 years in by the time this stuff is ever released. But it's really cool, and it's really fun. And it's kind of this neat evolution of the direction that I've tried to go. Started out just making sure that my sparkling wine would re-ferment in bottle to, by the 19, using local honey for the tirage, and doing some really fun stuff. So I'm pretty excited about that someday, to release those wines. I just 2 days ago disgorged some 100% Riesling Petnat Method Ancestral from Lewis Peak, kind of a follow-up, a little bit more grown-up version of the Petnats I put out the last couple of years, kind of just a teaser into this more serious style. So I'm pretty excited about that. I was really excited. I actually bought a new capper that made the job much easier. So I was pretty pleased. I have a small block that yields almost nothing at Weather Eye, on the windiest site of the whole vineyard, right at the crest of Red Mountain, where every vine has its own rock mound protecting it from the wind. The block has been dubbed by the crew the Mountain Monster, and so that's what we're going to call the wine. And so I have that coming at some point in the future. I think that's, and then I'm always really excited. My Weatherized Roussan, is relatively new wine for me, 2 vintages in now, and pushing the skin contact and the whole cluster fermentation quite a bit further. That's a wine that really makes me smile, and something that I'm really excited to get more of it in front of people.
And are these all ones we should be looking for under the Devium label?
Yeah, this will all be Devium. I don't know what all the labels will look like yet, but it'll all be Devium.
Keith, how would you compare your Roussan to a classic CDP one?
I would not. When making the first vintage, so it carries some classic Roussan notes. I don't know, but it's because of the amount of skin contact in the whole cluster. So I foot crushed it and left it on the skins and stems for the first vintage for a week. The 2020, I went 2 full weeks. It's like an orange wine without any oxidation, which often you find in orange wines. But to me, it's just such a textural experience. And that was kind of all I focused on with the Roussan, especially in 2019. 2020, I just wanted to push things a little further, and I love where it went. But in 2019, I was just thinking about texture the whole time. And so it's just this crazy textural, it's like, again, I don't do tasting notes, but for impressions, it's like, it just reminds me of like the skin of a peach or an apricot. And that's like the texture of that wine.
Sounds a little bit like Roti's white wine.
It is, except this has quite a bit of tannin to it. And so it goes into a different textural realm, because I know Roti's whites, and they're lovely wines. Their texture is more volume from that kind of richness you get from Rhone whites. Whereas the texture of my Roussan, I kind of think of it, it's a more rigid texture from the tannin and the acid.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, I don't know of anyone leaving the one on the skins in the Southern Rhone for any appreciable time when you're talking about
I'm not aware.
I don't think I've ever come across that. Brilliant. I'm excited for that one.
It's a fun one. It's one I actually, because it was so different for me to make and do, I didn't really, I knew I liked it. But I remember when I first brought it home to my wife, Shelly, and we were sitting and tasting it together. And, obviously your spouse should be a cheerleader. I hope everyone's is. Mine kind of doses enough honesty in there to keep it real. But she literally tasted it, and she was, I don't know, I had a few sips, and she said really kind of quietly, she said, "I like all of your wines, but I think this is special." And that was when I knew I was onto something, because she's definitely called me out a few times on some of my wines.
That's good. Cool. And that's a Weatherized.
That's Weatherized
as well. Exciting. Eventually we're gonna have to get Ryan on. He's like famous in the club.
He's famous in Washington, but good luck finding him or tracking him down. He's like Suho with the bouncing email. Up there, just living on his mountain.
Fair enough. Well, cool. If you're off the hook, Keith. Thank you so much. Luke, thank you for your input there. I just asked that you.
Thank you, Luke. Thanks for all the education. I love
wine stocked, for God's sake.
I love these wines, but the knowledge and the information you're able to provide is fantastic.
Masterfully done. Thank you.
So great.
Ian, you're running a great thing. The wine maker forward approach is an 11 out of 10.
it's just the way I've learned. You know, it was a trick that my brother taught me, to be honest, about food. But it also means I do less work because I just put Keith front and center.
But the background work that you must do to pull this off, very impressive. Really,
Sure.
really. genuinely.
Procuring has been tricky. Calling in a lot of favors for sure.
And
the
then
April Club definitely has like a direct shipment from Italy involved.
Yeah, bravo.
And then connecting to people like Keith and Luke. Thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you
Yes.
and
Thank
enjoy.
you.
You need to run. You guys have, thank you, Ian. We look forward to next
Thanks
month
so much.
allocation. And I'm glad you're taking a little bit of a break. This rate of 4 to 6 bottles a month with all the other wine we get is it's breaking me a little bit. So
Yeah, we're gonna have to, for a couple reasons. It's not gonna be 12. I think 6 to 8 is the right pace for a year, just given the time it takes to find
and
the
the
wine.
quality of wine and how much wine you make me want to buy afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
Danielle. Thanks, Pierre.
Okay.
I was going to say that's becoming the problem is, I don't know, by the end of the year, I'm going to have so much wine I need to buy that I'm just never going to be able to drink it.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to slow down from that
It's the
standpoint.
rabbit hole you follow when winemakers start recommending wines, that you find all these new great wines that you have to buy.
I mean, as of right now, I think we both want to just buy enough of Keith's wine to drink for the rest of the year. So
I'm definitely gonna have some. I've already put in my orders, so if you want me to tack 1 or 2 new ones on, I'm happy to do that.
Good to have a friend.
Yeah, these are exciting. I think this is one of the most exciting projects in the Pacific Northwest right now.
Thank you.
And it's young, and I think it's gonna blow up. I keep saying that, but I do have nightmares about that.
We both have nightmares about that. Obviously blowing up is a great thing, but there's a flip side to it, because I like sharing my wine with people. So hopefully I get to do that for as long as possible.
Do you have like a standard wine club, Keith?
I don't.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I've been playing around with the idea. We're trying to figure something out. But every time I think of something, I don't like it. And so maybe someday.
Nice game.
But I have a mailing list.
Sweet. Cool. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this. What are you drinking, Jessica?
Devium. I went back to that.
Devium.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks
I
so
gotta go
much.
now.
Sorry
I
you
just
didn't have the
have to have a
wines,
wine now.
Yati. But I hope you learn. You got to get a hold of these.
Yes, definitely. I will. Yeah, very, very educational. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.
Lovely to meet you all. Yeah.
I'll bring some Devium back, by the way, for next time I'm in Seattle, so that you can taste it.
Good idea. Yes.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Ian.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
Night.
All right. This is
How much?
jump off here and go answer some emails. If anyone has any last questions or any comments or anything at all, I'm be happy to answer.